gotta do that. So I'm very lucky. I have 3 daughters-in-law and a daughter. And so I don't know why we're in the girls' school, but I guess all the girls. And they all said all the girls, but one really took, really meant it. I mean, she's a teacher, and teachers are, when they say something, they really mean it. So Carol worked for, baby no Israel, so Carol, she's sitting in that, right there. So Carol, her teacher, and she had 2 children, her 2 children at the time. But she said, as long as you come, anytime I say. So it was anytime Carol called me, I was there. And I remember we sat there with 2 boxes of tissues next to us, telling the story and writing. She was typing on a computer with lightning speed. I would tell the name of cities, and she would look it up at the computer to make sure there were such cities and it was correct. And she would look up dates. And I even forgot the name of the boat that we came to America. Of course, I was my husband. He kind of knew. My husband knew things that I didn't know about myself, so which is amazing. So I told Carol the name of the boat, and she looked it up, and I told the truth. So I doubted myself. So it took us a while. How long did it take us to write that book?
I don't know.
A couple of years. Yeah, it took a while.
We're blessed for it.
And then Carol's mother and different people gave their opinion. I think Charlie, who sat in the front here at the first seat, he decided on the title of the book. We couldn't decide what title, and Charlie decided on the title. So, yeah. It's called A Long Candle. The reason for it is because I was converted to Catholicism. That wouldn't do any good as far as the Germans are concerned, because once you were born Jewish, you would say on your head you were still Jewish. But the person that kept me didn't want to have a sin of, I had to go to catechism class. I had to, if I didn't, then everybody would know I was Jewish, because all the Christian children went to catechism class. Well, she didn't want me to be Christian if I wasn't baptized. So she baptized me. And she baptized my brother. And the story just continues unless there are some questions.
I do have a couple other questions. Because you mentioned that your family was in the ghetto in 1942.
Right, how did we survive?
What was it for the audience? The ghetto was liquidated in November of 1942.
Most people, when we were in the ghetto in 1942, we heard that other cities people were being killed. Just the ghetto, they gather everybody in the ghetto and take them in the open field and shoot them. I mean, thousands of people at a time. And my parents heard that, and so my father, the Germans did all kinds of subterfuge. All kinds of, they send out rumors, the things that can happen. So one rumor was, if you volunteer for a concentration camp and you work for the Germans, you'll be fine. You live through the war, you'll be fine. So my father volunteered for a concentration camp, Skarżysko. If you look it up, there were 1,200 concentration camps in Poland. They had the most concentration camps of any country in Europe because they welcomed the Germans. The other countries fought against the Germans. So my father volunteered for the concentration camp. My mother was hidden by an exterminator in her basement. That was just the beginning of their hiding places. The stories just continue and continue. It is so unbelievable that I don't believe it. when I was young, especially when I was young, I was the most honest person the world has ever seen. I had to tell the truth all the time. And here I had this, the whole war, from the beginning to the end. I mean, one of the questions I asked, how do you act as a Jewish girl being Catholic? Then I didn't even think about it, but I remember having this heavy stone right here. It's like something was pressing against my body, and so about being Catholic. So I went to catechism for a year, church twice a week. Didn't go to school because the school was in another village, and we decided that too many people should know us, my brother and me. But I'm skipping around. I will not tell you the sequence, but you don't have to know the whole story. That'll take a year. In the book I have 97 stories, and that doesn't even tell everything. So,
as I understand, so you lived as a Catholic girl in, what town were you in?
well, the way we got to the Catholic, we were in the book. My father escaped from the concentration camp, which is, if anybody ever wants a movie, make a movie. If you would just make a movie of my father escaping from the concentration camp. He had a fever. And anybody that had a fever would be shot at the next roll call. The things that they were doing, they weren't working for the German army. They were carrying rocks from one place to the other, just to wear them out and kill them. My father said the food they got, if they got soup and they saw a piece of vegetable swimming by, it was a cause for celebration. They did give the prisoners, for good behavior or for extra work, a cigarette once in a while. My father would give away his cigarette for a slice of bread, because my father never smoked, and people would give away the last slice of bread for a cigarette. Anyway, my father, he sat on a board, by the way, in the barracks, and he said he would try to stay awake because he wanted to have a few minutes of peace and rest. Try to keep himself awake. But he decided to, because he again had a fever, he decided to run away. And the camp was surrounded by barbed wire that was electrified. If you cut the barbed wire, a message was sent to the guard houses, there were few from guard houses around the camp. And the soldiers would come and kill you. So my father got an electric shear, and he could cut the barbed wire from one of the Polish guards. My father had his wedding ring. He gave him the wedding ring for the shears. And when he got to the place where he wanted to cut the wire, there were already a few Jewish men. Somehow they found out my father was escaping. And first there was a sequence of things that first you cut the wire, then there was a tall wall you had to climb. And my father said they were young. My father was maybe 30 at the time. There were young boys, 17, 18-year-olds. And my father said to one of the boys, "You go first." And the boy said, "You're old enough, you live long enough, you go first." My father went first. And all the people that went after my father were killed. The shots rang out and they were all killed. My father, that wasn't the end of it. From that high wall, he jumped into a creek. There was a creek. When he jumped into the creek, there were reeds, high reeds, so he was able to hide in the creek. There already were German soldiers there with dogs that were sniffing for human beings. But they didn't find him because of the high reeds, and he was underwater. When the soldiers finally left, they couldn't find him. go to a forest which was nearby. It was like a half a block away, forest. It was all wet, and it was winter. Polish winter. You don't know winter like Polish winter. The snow was 6 feet high. So he crawled he said, he told that story. Crawled into that forest and he fell fast asleep. When he woke up 8 hours later in the morning, he was a nice man. He was completely frozen solid, but he didn't have a cold and he was fine. He didn't have a fever. And so he started walking to meet my mother. Just one of us, while he was walking, he met a guy with a horse and wagon. And he asked if he could ride in the wagon. The guy said yes. So they came to this certain town, and the guy said, I have some business in town. You wait for me here. So he went to this horse and wagon, and my father suspected it was something. So he hiked. There were a cornfield, and cornfields can go on for miles. My father hid in the cornfield, deep into the cornfield. And a little while later, the guy came back with a German policeman, but they couldn't find him in the cornfield. And the story just continued. I say there are 97 stories, there's more than 97. I mean, if I wasn't there, I wouldn't believe it. You know, there's a story that President Eisenhower was one of the people that freed the camps, some of the camps. He was commander-in-chief at the time. He told his photographers when they came to the camp, take all the pictures you possibly can, because the bastards will not believe it. He meant the people, the Americans, anybody will not believe it. And that's so true, because you can't believe it. I mean, I'm a witness, but I'm just one witness.
And you're telling us your story, so now we can, through your story, perpetuate it and make sure that it stays around. I have a question, skipping ahead a few years. She was a Catholic girl on the farm. After the war, when your family reunited, where did you go, and was that the end of anti-Semitism?
I have to tell you something else before that. We were at a different place. I don't know, one of my mother's brothers joined the Polish Army. A long story about what happened to him. My other uncle joined the Polish partisans. The Polish partisans were fighting the Germans, but they were also killing Jews. They didn't know he was Jewish. My mother's whole family is blonde and blue-white. My father's family is darker, but my mother's family was like all they were black Polacks. And he found us. We were in a hut in the woods. Somebody found a hut, and he appeared. Uncle Nathan appeared. He was like 18, and he said, "I have a place to save the children." So there was my brother and I, and my cousin, my aunt's son. He was also 4 years old. My brother was 4 years old. I was about 7. And he contacted my grandfather's bookkeeper. My grandfather had a grain store. And he had a bookkeeper that came once a week to do the books. And this bookkeeper was against the Nazis, against the Germans. And he said, "I will take care of you. If people need saving, I will save them." So it was decided, there was a whole group of us in that barn. So it was decided my aunt and her son will go to this Kurchati, was her name, to that people's house. But my grandmother decided that, she said, "No, Lola's children have to be saved." But my mother's name was Lola. So that's my brother and my uncle listened to his mother. And so it was my aunt, her son, and my brother and I. So he got a hay wagon with hay in case somebody sees us, we can hide in the hay, and took us to where these people lived. The people didn't really live there. The people left their home and hid in a small village because they were anti-Nazis, so they were on the list to be something. I guess sent to Germany to a war camp. They weren't going to be killed, not like the Jews. And these are the people that I went to catechism class and communion, and I had my picture with my first communion. We lived with these people for 42, 43, 44, at least 3.5 years. They risked their lives to save us. Every Christmas I still send money to Poland, and this is now, I think it's 75 years ago. A long time. Well, since 45, so you figure out how many years. The people that saved us had died already, but their daughters, so one of the daughters gets one. We used to send clothes and medicine, and then they decided, I guess Poland got better, so they didn't need the clothes and medicine, so we've been sending checks now for many years. And in fact, they visited us in America a few times. So, Brother Rob asked a question.
Righteous people. I do have a question. So after the war, you returned.
Okay, after the war, my parents were hidden by my parents were in the woods with my grandmother, a cousin, and my uncle. They were in the woods, I didn't know place to go, and Polish winter was coming. And some farmers saw them from a distance. They saw somebody and they suspected they were Jews, and they were going to give them out to the Germans. And one of the farmers heard the story, and he somehow found my parents in the woods, and my mother just appeared. And he said, I will be here tomorrow with a certain rock, he told them, and I will save you. His name was Józef, Polish. It's Joseph. And my parents weren't sure that what if he's with the Germans, so they kind of hid in different places, but he appeared by himself. And Józef saved my parents. So, long story, but I'll just have a brief. He saved them he built a wall in the barn, between the stable and the barn, not a double wall, a wall that was 4 feet away from the other wall. And they stayed in that confined space. And every day they would bring them food with an opening. I'll skip a few things. But the war, the Germans and the Russians were shooting each other. It was beginning of 1945. And yes, and Józef came to my parents and said, you'll have to leave the barn because in case the barn gets on fire, you'll have no way to get out. So they stayed outside of the barn. And my father says, you remember German soldiers jumping over the hole in the ground where they stayed, during the shooting. And finally, it got very dangerous even being there because of the war. So they left, and they were in the forest. And my mom said they had nothing to eat. And there would be a little stream of water so they had something to drink. They tried to eat grass, she says, but they couldn't eat grass. And she tells them one story where right before that, she was pregnant and she miscarried. And it was was born but was dead, and my father buried. And so she sat next to the little stream and kept pouring water on herself to stop the blood that was coming out. She said another little stream, she would have died. And so then they ran through the forest, and she was so tired that they sat down there under this tree. She said, and she described that tree, and what a beautiful tree it was, because they haven't seen daylight for 2 years, so it was amazing to see a tree. And suddenly, just suddenly, my mother stood up and said, we can't stand here, we have to go. And my mother says, I can't, I'm too tired. And he starts walking away, and she gets up and follows him. And they're just very close by. And they hear, and they see a horse under that tree. And my mother, again, it was the most beautiful horse she said, because she hasn't seen anything for all these years. And all of a sudden, a German plane came and dropped a bomb, and the tree and the horse disappeared under the mountain. That's how I told you that story. And that was it. They were just a little bit away from that tree. And so they sat down at the road, right on the road, on the grass, and the Russians already occupied the area. The Russian wagon passed by and stopped when they saw them. And it happened, the captain of the group happened to be Jewish. And he went up to my parents and he said, my father said, in Hebrew. And my father said, yes. And you come with me. He was driving through the area to find Jews to save them. And he took them to the Russian army camp. And took them to a little room, and he said there was a little already a Jewish girl in the little room that he saved. And my parents, and he told them, you can't be in the army camp without having a profession, because you have to work for the army. So of course my mother said she was a seamstress, because all women could sew at that time. And my father said he was a butcher. And if he's a butcher, you'll never be hungry, So they stayed with that army for about 6 months. But there are many stories, because some of the Russians thought they were Russian spies, the German spies. They were sentenced to death. They were taken to 3 different camps. One story says they were in this camp, and the Russian soldier told them, we're going to shoot you. We decided that you're spies. And my father was digging their grave. While my father was digging the grave, my mother heard a Russian soldier playing a song on the harmonica. And my mother knew that song, so she started singing. See, my mother comes from a family, the Friedenbergs. They were not afraid of anything. That whole family was like that. I mean, my uncle was a partisan, my other was a soldier. None of them that didn't mean anything to them. And so my father said, you're crazy, they're going to kill us. Why are you singing? She said, as long as I live, I sing. I'm not like that, but it's to be envied. People are very strange people. So, well, finally, they came to another judge, and the judge decided my father was circumcised, because none of the Polish men were circumcised. If you were Jewish, you were circumcised. And he released them. And that's how they ended up in the Russian camp, by the way. Ahead of myself. Yeah. Anyway, while in the Russian camp, my parents didn't know that I was alive. They didn't know my brother had died. My brother had died because we were afraid because maybe he would have died anyway, but we were afraid to take him to the doctor because he was circumcised. And so a healer came, a Polish healer, somebody with witchcraft came, somebody lit a candle, and I sat there next to him, and he died. Has been since 1945, figure out how many years. When I cornfield. Do you realize that you can't get out of a cornfield if you don't have good sense of direction? You go 3 rows into a cornfield and you're done for. And my father went on these little cornfields that were miles long, and he always knew his way out. So some people just know. Anyway, so he came to town in Kelson. Somehow, I don't know how, he found the people that saved us. And the man told him that my father was dead, and I was in the hospital. What happened was, when the Germans and the Russians met a certain place, about 1945, they came to the village that we were in. We were a village called Ogrodzenie. Ogrodzenie in Polish means surrounded. It was 15 houses surrounded by a great forest. And the Germans were afraid to go into that town because it was mostly lots of partisans were around the town, in the woods. So once they could get into that town, they would never be able to get out. So I don't know what I'm telling you about Virginia. But anyway, my father rode the bicycle, and the reason I'm telling you about that little town where we lived through the war is because I got the war, the shooting started, and there were no bunkers. Some men out of a hole right around across the road, which was as big as this little thing, this little way here, next to the barn, which was across the little road. And when the shooting got real bad, we ran into that hole in the road. And that went on for weeks. We could actually see the Russian soldiers. I carried the water from the well. It was like a block and a half away, with a wooden thing and 2 buckets. And I was 10, 8, 9, 10, and 11, a skinny little thing. And I carried I don't know how I carried 2 buckets of water, but I did many times a day. And the shooting, the bombs were across my head. That didn't bother me. Once you get used to death, it's there. So nobody washed, nobody ate, nobody did anything. So I developed cradle cow. I got pus in my head. It became so bad that my hair was stuck to my head. And I decided, it was 11, I decided I have to go to the hospital because I'm sick. So I walked the 4 miles to the hospital. And I remember it was a wooden door. I knocked on the door, and it was all nuns at that time. It was nuns that kept the hospital. And the nun opened the door. She said, "Oh, you poor orphan." There were lots of orphans. I thought, I would be tempted. I was like, she's called me an orphan. I'm not an orphan. I have no idea my parents were alive or not. She put me I remember she put me in a bathtub and started pouring water on my head and on my body and cutting my hair. Just cutting. And then she put ointment on my head. I was in the hospital for 3 months. But when my father came to this town, that was the town of Kelsa, the man told him that I was in the hospital, and my father went to the hospital. He was wearing a Russian uniform, a Russian soldier's uniform. He was the most handsome thing I've ever seen. I haven't seen him in 4 years. And I wasn't sure it was my father, really. But, he started talking to me and telling me that my mother's going to come soon, and made me feel good. And then a few weeks later, my mother came, and she was also in a Russian uniform. It was like the most amazing thing I've ever seen when I saw my parents. But it doesn't end there. It just continues. This story that I told you, this is only half of the decided that the returning Jews won't have any place to live, so dedicated a house, an apartment house. It's like 4-story high. I don't think there was an elevator, I'm sure there was. For the Jews to live. So we got a place. It was a 4-room apartment. It was a 4-room apartment, 4 families lived there. So we shared the kitchen and the bathroom. But it was home. It wasn't just that. It was, that's right, yes, we had our own room, yeah. And so we lived there, and UNRWA, what is that, the UN, UN Refugees, something association, they had a soup kitchen. Every day I went to get soup in that little bucket. And one day I'm coming back, 2 blocks with the soup, and there's a parade, some kind of parade. I love parades. I always love parades. And I stood there watching the parade, and the motto is "Kill the Jews." The Poles, after the war.
But your dad had friends in the building, right?
No, the Jews lived in the building. Well, this was on the street. I'm just telling you, we lived there for a few months, but the people that saved us, and they were great heroes, they risked their lives and the lives of their child because they could be killed by the Germans if they found out they were saving Jews. Absolutely. So the woman, Emilia Kuchati, came to my mother and she said, "I really feel guilty. I promised Jesus that his children will be Jewish, that your daughter will be Jewish, and the daughter will be Christian," and I converted her. And now she's being Jewish. She's back with you. That's all she said. And my mother was afraid. She was afraid of the Poles. She was afraid they'll take me away from me. So, another thing that I got, it's all a chain of miracles or happenstance, or I don't know how it happened. My mother somehow contacted her brother who was in Warsaw, who was in the Russian army. Who was in the Polish army, but under Russian control. There was no transportation, there were no telephones, everything was bombed. How did she contact her brother in the Russian army? I don't know. If we asked her, she wouldn't know. But one evening, he came with a Russian truck with another friend. His name Yashvetsky was his name. That was also a Jewish man. There was a soldier, a Polish soldier. And he took us to the city when we left on the cover of night, nobody should see. We left to another city close to the Czech border. The reason we had to be the Czech border is because we could get smuggled to Czechoslovakia, and from Czechoslovakia we could get to Germany, and from Germany we could get a visa to the United States. So we traveled to the city of Warsaw. Within months of our leaving that house, 42 Jews, there was a pogrom, 42 Jews were killed. And this is all Holocaust survivors that lived through the war. And my mother, not being afraid of that friend, our Savior, who said, "I would like your daughter to stay Catholic," we would all be there. So it's like, how did that happen?
And living through all that and not knowing the difference between human and monster. And living through all these years of not knowing the difference between human and monster, between somebody who's going to save you and somebody who might turn you in. How did you keep your faith in humanity? In God?
Keep faith?
Yeah.
Well, there was no time for faith. And there was no time for fear. was a curfew, and the Russian soldier would shoot first and then ask questions. So they sent me because nobody would bother a child. Can you imagine? Or, yes. So I remember passing many Russian groups of soldiers that were like in a certain spot. And I would tell them where I was going. They would laugh and say, they were also like 18, 19, But the guns and the soldiers didn't bother me because I was used to guns. What bothers me was there was a little park that I had to walk through to go to the midwife. I was afraid to walk because it was dark in the park. See what I mean? Yeah. So I got the midwife and I brought her and my sister was born. And of course then my uncle came and got us out, and within just a few months before the killing, all these people we knew that lived, that survivors that lived through the war were killed by the boys because of a plot label. There was somebody that was died. They blamed it on the Jews killed them. To make, oh wait a minute, to use the blood to make matzah. Okay? Think about it. I mean, how can we live in a world like this?
How do you live?
There were some wonderful Christians. I mean, the people that saved us were beyond wonderful. And none of the Jews in Poland would have survived if not these wonderful Christians that risked their lives to save us. So credit has to be given where credit is due. So there was one of the daughters of the people who lived in San Diego. We visited them, we stayed with them. They came to Pandari when we lived there, before we moved here, They stayed with us. So, what can I tell you, And the story is just continuing. We smuggled through my uncle Nathan, who was in the Polish partisans. One day he came on his motorcycle with another friend, 2 motorcycles, and he took us to the border with Czechoslovakia. But you couldn't cross the border because there were guards, Polish guards on the Polish side and Czech guards on the Czech side. I don't know what they did. They didn't take us there. They took us to the border on the motorcycle. Then they told us which way to go to cross the border. They didn't come with us. We had to be very quiet. It was nighttime. And it's possible that some of the guards were bribed, but I don't know for sure. I didn't know. We walked at night, and I remember there were high weeds and sticky bushes, and I got a rash on my legs, and my sister was months old. She was asleep, so we were hoping the baby would not cry. And we came to this house at the edge in Czechoslovakia, and these people were pale, so they welcomed us with open arms, and they gave us food and gave us a place to sleep. And the next day they took us to Bratislava, which is a city in Czechoslovakia. And that was a safe house. It was perfectly legal to say a safe house. I don't understand, but they were all Holocaust survivors in that house. And there was food, they fed us. And we got a pass to go to Germany. Within a few weeks, we stayed there a few weeks. And that's another story going to Germany. But the curious thing is, the Germans killed 6 million Jews. But in Germany, we lived in Germany for 4 years. We went on vacation, we went on the trolleys, we went on the buses, we went on the train, we were never afraid. In Poland, we were always afraid. So I did my brain, I figured out that the Poles, you tell them don't kill the Jews, they don't kill the Jews. You don't kill the Jews, you tell them don't kill the Jews, they kill the Jews. We tell them, don't kill the Jews, they still kill the Jews. The Germans, we tell them, kill the Jews, they kill the Jews. Tell them, stop killing, they stop killing. They're the same kind of our people, they just obey orders. I mean, I cannot explain it any other way. I mean, people can read it in the books. It's not like I didn't make this up. I keep talking, but there's a million stories.
That's all right, and thank you very much for sharing your story. If you would leave us with one message that you'd like us to take away from tonight.
Israel is very important. Was very important to my husband, especially my husband. My parents were very much for Israel. Just my father didn't want to go to Israel because he was so worn out. He suffered so much through the war. He lost all his teeth. He got ulcers. He just couldn't. He said, I can't stand the heat and I can't work the fields. Just couldn't do it. Just an example. So we lived in the town of Kelsen, in that house where they killed 42 Jews. And my father, he was always doing something. He would buy a dress and sell it for a profit. He would buy a bottle of whiskey and buy another empty bottle and put water into half the bottles and sell it to the Russian soldiers. Of course, whiskey, they would sell their mother for whiskey. And so he would have 2 bottles of whiskey. So he always did business. So we lived like about less than a block away from the train station. And I always accompanied him to the train station and to see the different trains come and go. And one time, and he went about at least twice a week to the countryside. One time I went with him and the train wasn't there yet. It was like a few minutes before the train. And I said, you're not taking the train. And he said, why? I have an appointment. I have to take the train. You can't. And I became hysterical. I screamed and hollered and cried and held on to him. And the train came and left. And my father didn't take the train. 3 Jews were killed on that train that day. How did I know that? I didn't cry the other days. I accompanied him and took the train. That I became hysterical. And he listened to me, which is amazing because I became that hysterical. And those things are like, the rabbi asked me about Israel. My husband and I went to Israel 16 times. We were in Israel a month each time we went to Israel. We traveled the whole country. We rented a car and we would just go. Never made reservations. Many never believed in reservations in America or Israel. So we just went. But it's amazing. It's like there was always room for us. Of course, there were a couple of places there wasn't room for that. There was a place near the Dead Sea that we called out from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. We wanted to stay at this. That time I insisted that the Dead Sea we have to go there. So we called, and even at that time, I'm talking about 40 years ago, it was like $250 a night in a kibbutz. It was a fancy kibbutz, but I know we were never going to pay that kind of money. So I said, we can't. So then he said, let's go anyway. I mean, not to the kibbutz, we just go. So we went. And there was a youth hostel. It was even closer to the Dead Sea than that fancy hotel, than that fancy kibbutz. So we come in, and it was like $8 a night. And we got our room. And the room was as big as this top of this thing. 2 little beds. There was a window, and you would see the Dead Sea from the $250 place. You couldn't see the Dead Sea. The room, 2 little beds. And we had to leave our clothes and everything in the car because there wasn't a room for it. But there was a bathroom. And the food was like $2 for breakfast or $5 for breakfast. It was very little. Even then it was very little. And there was lots of German tourists. That time there were lots of Germans, I guess, to assuage their guilt or maybe the children of the traveled all over Israel. We once came to Jordanian border and the Israeli soldiers sent us back because we don't cross the border. Just as an aside, I always give care to my children, of course. But the last 2 years, all my grandchildren, thank God, are working. So for the last 2 years, I sent them all 5 different Israeli charities. Pick one and I'll send $500 for it. So I sent $500 to each Israeli charity. But because they don't need the money, Israel needs the money. But besides that, when my children were little, my synagogue, Yaden Jewish Community Center, had an Israeli bond drive. Once a year, they would have dinner and entertainment and a bond drive. And no children were invited. It wasn't that they weren't allowed. I always brought my children because I felt if the children don't go and see the bond drive, they won't know to buy a bond. You have to teach them. So, and the bonds were I think it was less than $100, the cheapest bond, and then you got $100 back if you bought that bond. And my children always raised their hand. They were 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and bought a bond. Because you have to teach your children to buy bonds. Just like the $500 that you people got is because you have to support Israel. Grandbaby was born and she has an Israeli bond. She'll be 10 years, in 15 years. She'll be 15 years old. Big deal, right? So also the Jews have to support Israel. Because every nationality is proud of their countries. The Italians are proud of Italy. The Irish are proud of Ireland. We have to be proud of Israel. And people respect you if you have a country. You're welcome any place, but they respect you if you have a country. So it's really important.
I think this is a good time. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your story. We can open up for 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and I'll pass around the microphone.
I'd just like to know where your brother was buried.
Yes.
Where was your brother buried after he passed away?
Where was your brother buried after he passed away?
Where is what?
Your brother.
Oh, my brother's buried in Poland in a Catholic cemetery. And we never thought of going to Poland. We would never go to Poland. I would never go to Poland. My mother said, always said, and she was right, she said, the Polish ground is soaked with Jewish blood. We left Poland as fast as we could. There were Jews that stayed in Poland longer because they couldn't leave their home, and I understand, but we couldn't wait to leave. I mean, especially my father and my mother did. Just another story. We were the German decided that there was they let it be known that the town of Sandomierz, it was called, that the Jews could come to Sandomierz, the ones that were hidden, and nobody will touch them, they'll be fine, they could live their lives in that place. My grandmother picked my brother and I up by another farmer that it was going to be bad. It couldn't stay there any longer. And we would be pretending that we're going to Sandomierz. We were caught by the Polish police and put in jail. And every day, the policeman would come and say, we're going to shoot you today. Finally, one night, 2 policemen came. It was my grandmother, my brother, and I, the 3 of us. And the 2 policemen came in. Today, we definitely put on your clothes. There was snow on the ground. We're going to shoot you. Didn't bother me one bit, but you sentenced to death that if I was relief me. My grandmother took my brother's charge jacket, and she started buttoning each button. I remember watching her buttoning each button. And the policeman started laughing, he's the guard. And he said, why are you buttoning his button? He's not going to catch a cold. We're going to shoot him. And my grandmother continued buttoning the button. And there was a large window in the jail room. And I was looking out the window and I saw a tree and I saw the searchlight hitting the tree. And I thought to myself, I could picture it. I saw it. I could picture the three of us standing under the tree. And I could picture them shooting us. And we falling to the ground. And I saw the snow turn red with our blood. I saw that. I remember seeing it. And then the policeman said, never mind. And they left it.
Wow.
And then a few days later, a wagon came. My mother was in the wagon. Somebody told somebody and paid somebody off. And we joined my parents. But that, 1,000 stories, it just continues. And this is the story of one person. Can you imagine all the people that have stories like that? I mean, I see this, the boat that goes down the Danube, seeing Europe. But when I hear of Europe, I start shaking. I can't. We could only, my husband and I traveled. We went to islands in the winter time. We went to see all the American state parks. Shenandoah was our second home. We always went to Israel. I mean, every other year we went to Israel. We never went to Europe. I married an American because I wanted to stay far away from anything. First of all, far away from Holocaust survivors or Europeans. That's the story.
I'm just curious.
I'll read the book.
You mentioned a couple times that there were some Christians that were very good to you, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if those Christians had relationships with Jewish families. Did the Christians, were they segregated from Jews or were they connected to Jewish people?
See, before the war, we were Poles. We were like everybody else. There was no difference. I mean, the children went to the same schools. I went to a Catholic nursery school. Nobody thought there was anything strange about that. I don't know how to change, how people from being your friends will kill you the next day.
Bernice, I just wanted to say that you're so courageous, and thank you. I just wanted to say you're so courageous, and thank you so much for telling us at least some of your story. And we are incredibly blessed and grateful that you are a part of our community. And we all hope that you will continue to share your story with us through the beautiful book and through coming and talking to us and sharing your stories for many years to come, because it is so important to educate all of us and our future generations. And thank you so much for your courage and your fortitude and for continuing to thrive and teach all of your family to be wonderful and happy and proud Jews. Thank you so much.
We have a lone candle for you to light in honor of everyone who survived and everyone who couldn't
conscience.
Your story is keeping this candle burning, and through telling us, we're hoping to keep your story alive.
The Holocaust Museum brought the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. It is a foundation that has tripled and it became 10 times as big. Spielberg initially gave some millions of dollars. There was an interview where they interviewed me, and it was filmed by 3 filmmakers. I mean, I was very impressed by it. And that is at the Shoah, at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and any organization can get that film. I think it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours. I think it's like more than an hour and a half, because it was shown in two sections at Tarzan and some time ago. It was very interesting. And then there was a question and answer session. Thank you for sitting there. Yeah. I do have nice children and nice daughters. And the son-in-law's at home taking care of the great-grandchild. Her name is Talia.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Bernice. We're going to continue this evening with the Mariam service, after which we'll all sing the Tiferet.